Terrible news of the economy contracting by 3.2% in the first quarter is our top story. And of course, no doubt there will be some market reaction to that. We're going to catch up with Arabile Gumede, who's standing by for us at the JSE to find out whether there has indeed been a reaction. Arabile, how's the rand doing?
Has been a shift and a change in that market picture, not so much from the JSE's point of view, but certainly from the currency's point of view, which has shifted to around 14 Rand 60 against the US dollar. That mark will certainly hurt things quite a bit. And what does that mean then for things like the South African Reserve Bank? Do they then start looking at things and saying, yeah, we are near the midpoint of the inflation target band that they have been set, of course, between 3 and 6%, sitting at around 4.4 or so percent now, and perhaps it isn't such a bad idea to perhaps help South Africa's growth. But, of course, the key levers that need to be pulled here are those belonging to government. And President Cyril Ramaphosa will certainly be akin to trying to find a way to ensure that this never happens again. Yes, the first quarter is usually the quarters in which growth levels aren't as high as one would hope, but certainly you don't want to see it go down as much as it has right now. It is indeed one of the worst figures we've seen in quite some time, more than 10 years even, as a figure of 3.2% in that contraction for GDP. All the sectors, except the likes of government, actually headed lower and decreasing. The likes of mining going down 10.8%. The likes of manufacturing as well, 8.8% there. So a big fall on that front. Let's quickly just chat to Viv Govender then from Rand Swiss about this and just exactly how it's bound to impact South Africa's economy moving forward and whether there's any hope, despite seeing some slightly positive sentiment coming out of the likes of Moody's and those ratings agencies as well. Viv, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it. Not so long ago, we just come out of the IMF giving out its sense of how South Africa stands. We also had Moody's not so long ago, both perhaps hoping that South Africa can actually kick ourselves out of this and kickstart itself. Now we're in a new administration, and if ever they needed more proof as to how bad things are, this is certainly it.
Yeah, this is a terrible number, the worst number we've had in about a decade. Basically, the post-2008-2009 financial crisis was the next low point, before this one.
Yeah.
It's much worse than expected, about double what had been anticipated. And we are seeing the worst sectors being affected, things like manufacturing. I think the contribution because of the loss of manufacturing was more than all that we saw in the positive sectors, government and finance, for instance. The government sector was the fastest growing sector, which is not a good thing when you're talking about cutting down on costs and cutting down on spending, in terms of balancing our fiscus. So this is a very bad number overall. As you said, some of the worst figures were things that were a bit more, cyclical, things like things like mining and agriculture were very badly hit. Yeah. But we saw some key sectors, transport and tools manufacturing are very key sectors that were also very badly hit.
Where do we then look to? What is it that the president can now look towards to say, I need to pull this lever and this lever? Because yes, we may have a new administration, but it's still the same president, right? He had the investment summit, He had a job summit. He's already stated exactly what needs to be done. What's going to change now?
Look, here's the thing. We know what grows an economy, what doesn't grow an economy. What grows an economy is freedom. What does not grow an economy is more regulations. Yeah. So Africa's regulations are just, out of scale with with the sophistication of our economy and what we need in terms of jobs creation, etc. The amount of work, I know personally, as a person that helps run a small business, it is an immense amount of work just to fill in the forms, just to make sure everything is in order, for things. And it's a tiny business. It's like, not 100 people working there. If you think of how easy it is to operate a business in places like the US and so on, it's much easier to actually start a business and focus on the business of business as opposed to the business of regulations. And I think that's one key aspect. Of course, then the infrastructure, make sure the electricity works, make sure the water works. Look at Astral, having to have issues with water. Make sure the roads basically are functional. Crime, of course, is a function, again, in a way of infrastructure, of the government doing its job. And finally, longer term, we need to control, or at least create more productive citizens, and our education system is one of the worst in the world. We rank with war zones. You compare South Africa's education system to even our neighbors in Botswana, and we are significantly worse than Southern African neighbors, let alone world standards. Like 78% or 80% of our children can't read by the time they're 10 years old. and understand any language, and understand a sentence in any language by reading it. The majority of our schools, or almost the majority of our schools, can't produce a sufficient number of students that can actually be competent in mathematics. Whereas in places like Botswana, it's like 2 or 3% of schools can't meet those standards. So it's short-term reduce regulation, longer-term medium-term fix the infrastructure, and longer-term get the average South African more productive by being better educated.
Yeah, I've gone on the rampage, if you want to call it that, of asking just the questions around whether we should let go of the little tweaks that we keep on seemingly be doing right now, and perhaps instead say to ourselves, let's let go of our credit rating. Let's let go of the fact that we need to appease so many other people, and for once just say, we're going to let loose of the purse strings quite a bit here, and we're going to solve the problems, and then we'll figure it out, and eventually then it'll head in the right direction, of course with the right plan in place, but that now it finally gets implemented. Your sentiments perhaps around something like that? I mean, it is tricky, but...
The danger of that is that we get the IMF to come in and have to bail us out, and you've seen the history of that happening. It's the worst thing that can happen to an economy virtually, is that the IMF come in and bail you out, because then they put restrictions, they control everything, they micromanage from the top, as opposed to even like at the government level is at least better than having some guy from overseas coming and managing your economy. I mean, look at countries like, for instance, look at Pakistan and the number of times they've gone to the IMF and how badly it's affected them. The thing is that, look, I mean, the purse strings, I don't think government can solve this problem. Government, I think, is more of a hindrance. I mean, South Africans are entrepreneurial. South Africans are business-minded. Look at the successful South Africans we see internationally. I mean, one of the key indicators for whether or not the government is helping you or hurting you is whether or not, if you leave the country and go to somewhere else, are you making more money? So, as an African going elsewhere in the world is making a lot more money. I've seen, for instance, the number of engineers are basically applying for accreditation in Australia has doubled. Okay, in the last little while. So it's showing that people are going and being in demand elsewhere. South Africans are very productive, they're very qualified, etc. And they're able to do their business. The problem is that government, to a certain extent, doesn't help you do business. I mean, as a business person, like I said, a small business person, I can say, I'm a different kind of small business person than a person running a spaza shop, but again, as a small business person out there, I can tell you for a fact that it doesn't help you, or the South African government doesn't make your life easier. The amount of forms you fill in, the amount of regulations you have to comply to is very difficult.
Yeah. All right. We'll return and come back and talk specifically just about the market, but of course a harrowing figure with regards to that, a negative contraction there, rather, of 3.2% for South Africa's GDP between January and March. That's just the first quarter. Of course, another quarter of this, and we get into a technical recession, and would have entered that technical recession. It certainly isn't a place that President Cyril Ramaphosa wants to see himself in, and we'll have to do quite a bit in order to fix it. For now, that's a look at how things are with regards to that GDP data. We'll unpack the markets a little bit later.
Arabile, for that, my colleague Arabile Gumede at the JSE.